back live. And then for those that will be listening or watching this later, you'll be able to see the replays in audio and video form. But I'm excited. This was kind of scheduled because I wasn't feeling too hot a couple weeks ago. But I'm back, and I wanted to welcome Kevin to the podcast. We met in kind of like mutual friends party and got to talking. And I want to talk a little bit because I work in the medical field, and I think with everything that's been going on and with the pandemic and everything, you kind of had some insights. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I guess we'll start with kind of, before we'll get into like what you do in the medical world, kind of your background. What prompted you, other than like the typical everybody wants to be a doctor or a nurse, kind of to get into it, and kind of your background in education?
Well, my background was actually in art, so marketing and advertising is what I started in school as. But throughout high school, I was the art guy, so I was in the only person in Art 4 in high school, and then got accepted to the Art Institute in Portland, Oregon. So I wasn't even interested in the medical field when I first started in college. So I had a turn of events personally. I had one of my good friends pass away, so I moved back home because her grandparents, supported me throughout high school because my parents kicked me out for being gay, so they sort of took me in. So I moved back home for a little bit.
Wait, what? Okay. Not to bring up a sore wound, but like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk about, that's awesome that they took you in. So talk a little bit about that experience.
So their son actually ran one of the only gay bars back home in Louisiana. So they had a gay kid. So my best friend Kelsey, her grandparents took me in, and we split it was a 2-bedroom house, and me and Kelsey for 2 years split a bedroom. So I did that and worked 2 or 3 jobs in high school to graduate.
Awesome. And okay, so that's awesome that you had people help you out, your best friend and her family.
Yeah.
So being from an art, and I'm in, like, my day job is in marketing and advertising. We talked about that, but
yeah.
Kind of, how do you go from being like wanting art or marketing or some other kind of field to kind of switching to medical?
Well, I moved back home and I started working at my friend's coffee shop again. That's what I was doing before I left town. So I got my old job back, and my one of my best friends, Raven, was pre-med, and she was a manager of a transcription service at the ER back home, one of the big major hospitals. There was 2 in town, since we are centralized in Louisiana. So we have a trauma center, and then we have a smaller hospital which service psych, stroke victims, and other level 2 or 3 traumas in the area. So she needed people to come work as a scribe or transcriptionist in the ER. So I said, well, I need a job. I got fired from American Airlines. I did that for a little bit, and that didn't work out. So I was like, okay, I'll apply. So I studied, I got hired, and then I was crap at the job. I sucked at it. I was always getting in trouble. And then after a while, I started picking it up and working more and more shifts. And then she left to go to med school, or moved to Houston, to go be a project manager. And the other manager, who was my trainer, she was also leaving for med school. So I was the only seasoned scribe there in the ER. So I became manager by default because I knew everyone and what to do and the layout of the land. So I sort of fell into the job by accident. But once I started working in ER and trauma, I just fell in love with the people and the excitement and the atmosphere. And it's always every day is a different story in the ER. And I worked nights for 2 or 3 years. So I had plenty of stories to tell.
Okay, but before we get into those stories, I want to back up. What did you do at American Airlines?
I was ground crew. So I did I did the check-in. It's only a 4-gate airport back home, so it's a small airport. So we did everything. So I did the check-in. I did the loading of the plane. I loaded the passengers onto the plane, so I'd have to run upstairs to check in everyone, and then I would have to go back down and push the plane back.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And then that seemed like a lot of work. I don't know. It seems a little stressful, especially now when I even watch it in the traveling I've done this year. Like
Yeah.
when you watch that, like kind of dance that everybody's doing to get planes in and out, it's quite intense.
Yeah, I wanted to be a pilot growing up, so I loved working around airplanes. But the environment and the people were crap there because everything is based on seniority. So I was at the bottom of the totem pole. So I got to pick my hours last, and then the pay was crap. So I was doing it just to move up in the company and hopefully get in. So if I do go to flight school, I have already established a connection with some airlines. But then I wrecked a tug into a plane, so that got me fired. So,
Yikes. Okay. Well, I was just curious about that. So working in ER, I mean, I will say back when remember when there used to be the Discovery Health channel, and then
yes,
it became owned because Oprah has too much money. Anyway,
yes,
I used to love, and this sounds weird, but I used to love the show. Was it Trauma Life in the ER? And that show was intense, but it was also very dramatic. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about like what you experience in an ER as opposed to kind of what is shown on TV or what we see now, probably in the movies or whatever we're watching these days. So kind of talk to me about, obviously it's more traumatic in real life because the stuff is happening to real people, but kind of get into why those kind of shows kind of paint a different picture.
Well, like for House or The Good Doctor, like they're not going to have a teenager come in and be a doctor, obviously, and he's not going to find this rare disease in the ER and cure it by doing surgery right there on the floor. Or Dr. House, where, I mean, at a teaching hospital like that, you will have, your residents and your people that are on the floor learning, but they have guidance from their teacher or their head physician. But all that goes on in the ER is trying to fix a problem fast and effectively. When you're working as an ER physician, you always want to think of the worst case scenario, and then you want to work your way back from that. So if someone comes in with chest pain, of course, the first thing you're going to think of is either a heart attack or an embolism, not like a ruptured aorta that you're going to do ER right there on the floor after the housekeeping mopped. Like it's all fantasized. It's all, I mean, I think Grey's Anatomy is the most accurate just because they've been doing the show for so long and they have a lot of cast and they're actually on the floor. They're not in the ER, and that's a teaching hospital. So those, I think, are pulled stories from actual events when it comes to Grey's Anatomy. But yeah, all the equipment sometimes is used wrong. All the IV placements or intubations. Like as someone that works in the medical field, if you see like just a tube sticking out with no rope or like a piece of duct tape, it's just, I don't know who's doing the research for those shows, but they really need to do a better job.
Yeah, you would think at this point, since I mean, you mentioned Grey's Anatomy, that show's been on forever. It seems like, and you would
Yeah.
think that with that, and then the other like what Chicago Med and The Good Doctor you mentioned, that they would try to make it a little more accurate. Well, at least seem a little bit more accurate with their like props and I don't know. You would think at this point,
Yeah.
but I guess people just don't tune in for accuracy anymore.
No, not just a drama.
Yeah. So not that I want to go down the rabbit hole of like what's the craziest thing you've seen, but talk to me about like I guess I just from somebody that's like I've only been in the ER a couple times in my life due to injury, and so I haven't really spent a lot of time in the ER, so I don't really know what it's like from the other, not being a patient, I guess I could say. So explain to me kind of after you did the whole thing and you started in working in ERs, what was the most eye-opening thing about how hospitals are run?
When it comes to hospital administration, they're all about the numbers and they're all about making metrics. A lot of them don't work clinical anymore, so I think they're out of touch with reality. And with America right now, the doctors and nurses, everyone's tired. Everyone's tired. And when people come in with drug seeking behavior or psych issues, they get put on the bottom of the totem pole. So there is a lot of stigma and racism in the healthcare field. But a lot of that's just built up to getting pressure from society, government, uh, patients asking for things 24/7, not listening to their physicians after they're getting uh, details for you need to eat better, you need to lose weight. So a lot of that's what I saw when I was working uh, in the ER when I first started off. It's just that um, when you walk into those doors, there is judgment as you being a patient from either the doctors or the nurses. And we have a lot of repeat. We had a lot of repeat offenders coming in for if they're homeless, they just need a place to stay or food. But you have to treat them as a patient because what if one day that homeless dude that comes in every single day to the ER actually has a heart attack or stroke? Then we're just blowing him off because we already know who he is and what his story is. So that's what I saw firsthand. And I just feel I know I have a lot of friends in the medical field that still work inpatient, and they're all tired, especially first year students or people that are finishing med school or nursing school. They're getting that going into their job after graduating. So there's a lot going on right now in America, especially with the abortion thing. So doctors being told what to do, even though they've been to school 10 years, now they're getting told that they can't treat their patients. So it's a whole other can of worms at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get that I didn't even think about it for a minute, but so I know from my experience being in this is like 20 years ago, I had an injury, ended up screwing up my knee. But anyway, when I went into the ER, I had to wait forever. And the reason I waited forever is because when they initially got there and they asked me, like, what's your pain scale? I didn't know how to ask. I was in shock. I was like 6 or whatever. And because I wasn't a 10, I waited for like 3 hours in excruciating pain. And I don't know if that was just due to how busy they were or just because they're trying to treat, choose what to treat first. But you mentioned I've heard some other stories of people that, yeah, they were on the brink of something serious. And I've heard about like racism and just basically like the old, just kind of just not realizing they're human, even though they're in an ER. So, not to go down this rabbit hole, but like, why? I mean, obviously, our healthcare system needs some work. We can all agree on that. But why do you think that it's turned to such just like big business of like, okay, here's who we're gonna treat first and when? Like, it seems a little you would try to treat.
Yeah, it's another problem on top of another problem. So when you have people that work 12 to 16-hour shifts, like you would have nurses come in and they're begging people to have flow time or stay on or come in, and getting that consistent pressure from administration to work or come in or do doubles. People's true colors come out when they're just tired and exhausted and angry and cranky. So you get to see the real people. But on top of that, so example, with my hospital that I worked at, we were a major hub. So we had cardiology, interventional cardiology, radiology, oncology, urology. We had all these specialists on call. So with all these rural hospitals, like even here in Arizona, like the Flagstaff Hospital probably doesn't have on-call surgeons. So these patients that are in sick outlining areas, they need to come to our hospital because we're the only one maybe in the state that has that service. So we're constantly getting transfers of these sick patients. So that logs the system up, and we have to declare basically like the hospitals. I forgot what the code is, but basically the hospital's on standby. We can't take any more patients. We can't take any more ER patients, or we can't take any more transfers or ambulances. And then those patients get diverted to another hospital, and then that one gets full. So when all these hospital systems are full, when you're a little girl and you have a sprained ankle, you're the last thing on their mind because they have 3 cardiac arrest, 2 stroke patients, 1 that needs a heart cath placed. It all adds up and it all trickles down. I mean, even my own grandmother, when I worked at the hospital, had abdominal pain, and she waited 6 hours until I got to work. And I said, hey, can you guys please, get my grandmother back there? She's been in here 6 hours already. And, she's in her 70s throwing up and hasn't eaten in 3 days. So she's probably dehydrated and needs to be admitted. So.
Yikes. Yeah. I mean, so why, well, I guess that's just more questions of why there's not any more focus on making smaller hospitals have the resources. But I also think kind of what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, how, well, medical field right now is really understaffed because of the pandemic. And so I'm hearing that like people are, as you're talking about, doubles and all the kind of different shifts that even those that are working, even through the pandemic or even now, are dealing with, that seems to be kind of an issue. So I don't know, maybe it's just headlines I've read, but because of all of this, we're hearing more and more people just kind of like, I can't be a nurse. This is insane. Like, or try to look for another hospital or another place of work, or a doctor, private practice, or something like that. So kind of from your experience, what do you think would be kind of a solution to helping those that, because as you mentioned, they're, helping the homeless. I mean, they are still people, regardless of being homeless or not. So they need to be treated just as much as anybody else, but I understand why they would seek a hospital over something else. So kind of explain to me kind of what you think is a solution to that problem.
I think it starts with the community. I think as us as individuals need to know what to do if there's an emergency, who to contact, when or where do we go? Because if we're going to the ER for every single thing, that's going to back up the system. So I think public education is number one. And then number 2 is that I'm sure they have these in different hospital systems. I've seen it before, but having more interactions with administration and their staff members. When administration comes down and says, hey, I heard about this story last night, so what happened? They're going to blame the nurse primarily. There's a lady on Facebook, she's a nurse, and she's told horror stories of how a psych patient cut a nurse with scissors, and hospital administration came to her and say, well, what could you have done better as the victim? Which is horrible. And that's the mentality with the hospitals. And a lot of times staff members don't want to work because of hospital administration. Like, you have to do trainings every month. You have to do recurrent certifications for CPR and ADD, and then you have to do additional certifications for your nursing certificate. So doctors have to do the same thing. They have to do continuing education. They have to do additional training on meds that are coming out on the market. And then on top of that, you have compliance coming in. And if there's a quality event, it just adds up. So I think there needs to be more communication with the CEOs and CFOs of hospitals to speak one-on-one with their staff to know what the problem is and not jump the gun when there's complaints put on a nurse or the doctor. There needs to be just more communication with the public, the nurses, and administration at the bottom line.
Right. Yeah. It seemed, I don't know. Obviously, there's not going to be like it hasn't been solved so this far, but like it just seems to me like a problem that could be fixed if the right decisions are made, but that's just from an outside perspective. So you you moved, so you don't currently work in the ER anymore, right?
Not right now. Yeah. I've,
So yeah,
oh, go ahead.
what are you, like, what was the transition from that?
So I got promoted. So I was promoted to a project manager for my old company. So I implemented services to hospitals to improve uh, charting and patient turnarounds and return on investments. And currently, I work in uh, development of drugs right now. So I'm working from home. So I've worked all over the place in the medical field, and I've worked in multiple systems, like hospital systems, and then um, corporation wise, like the ones that are contracted to run the hospitals. Um, so I've worked in like urology, cardiology, uh, cancer is my uh, specialty that I work in. Um, but right now I'm doing drug development, which I enjoy a lot.
Okay. So I guess, well, personally, can we delve into like the mental health side of this? So like I used to
Yeah.
take um, what I used to call is a specific drug for my anxiety and depression that I went through in my life. And I got a lot of side effects from it. So it didn't make me feel better. So instead of following the doctor's orders, I actually decided to safely go off of it myself, and actually have been way better off of it and dealing with, all of that on my own. My question is, there is a stigma for and against medication in different areas of, whether it's mental health, whether it's cholesterol, whatever your need of medication for. As somebody who
Yeah.
develops drugs, what is your thoughts on like the stigma for and against? Because I can understand, I'm not trying to shame anybody that does need to take drugs, but at the same time, there's been, with the opioid epidemic and with everything that's happened, and then there's that show now on Hulu called Dope Sick, which kind of,
Yes.
I couldn't even get through the first episode. I was a little angry watching it, but it was so well done. What is your thoughts on kind of being somebody that's within it and helps develop medications?
I say before you take any drug, always speak with your physician and then always do your own research. Now, always do a reputable site, like always cite your sources. But the drug companies, they all have websites for medications. There's research on the FDA website for almost every drug. And then I would just read other people's reviews. And if it doesn't work, you can always talk to your doctor about maybe doing a lesser dose of the medication and then doing a trial for 30 to 90 days because it takes a couple of weeks for that med to get in your system. But everybody's body's chemistry is different, and I mean, medications are so sensitive. Like there's what drug is it? There's one drug that is affected by grapefruit.
Oh,
That if
geez.
you're taking this medication, I forgot which one it is, and you take grapefruit or something with it, I think I'm not sure if it's ACTZ or like a cholesterol or hypertension medicine, but it can mess it up. So that's something you should know. Or if the doctor knows, you do your own research and you see that someone has a side effect from this. But I definitely say take it in baby steps, especially if you've met it with a psychiatrist or psychologist. Say, I have this issue. I want to resolve it. Either if that's a different way of counseling, light therapy, meditation, starting with non-medicine treatments, and then moving into something as a trial. But yeah, like medicine's not for everybody, especially with mental health. That ER that I worked in was also a psych hospital, and there is a lot of stigma around medicines and what we think it's supposed to do for a patient and what it's actually doing to that patient. So
Yeah, because I guess I've been in my time dealing with my issues, and then recently, there's been a lot of other podcasts and people out there that have written books and have shows called, I don't know, there's one on Netflix right now, like How to Change Your Mind, and
yes,
how psychedelics can help a person with PTSD or anxiety, depression, the gambit. But because there's such a stigma on them being, I don't know what they call them, Schedule 1 or something like that, where they're illegal.
Yeah.
And then now there's being trials and stuff done that, as long as you're under the right circumstances, it's helping people. But we always hear about these type of drugs being taken in party situations, or slipped in a party, or just not being aware. So I guess my question is when it comes to that, it's like, if there was to be a chance where like psilocybin or MDMA is turned into like FDA says, okay, yeah, in small doses under the right circumstances, this can help people. Wouldn't there be more of a push, or do you think that it's because they're more natural? There's like this pushback.
I think right now in America, I mean, there's already a bill to legalize marijuana at a federal level, and what Biden did recently to pardon people with small felonies of marijuana charges is a great turning point for research and development into these drugs. I mean, there's a new narcolepsy drug that is GHB based, which is a party drug. I just saw an ad for ketamine infusions for anxiety and depression, which is also a party drug in some scenes in the LGBTQ community. And then mushrooms has been getting a lot of research and attention lately because there was a recent study in giving mushrooms to patients that are dying or on a hospice. Which that's a great article and great research, especially because I volunteer with hospice patients here in the Valley. So I definitely, if they want to smoke weed or anything to help ease their anxiety towards death, I mean, that's a great step for society, I think. And I think it's definitely, we're at the turning point where the government's going to start looking into these areas and thinking maybe this was wrong. Maybe we should start looking into this to better our society.
Right. Why do you think there's been so much pushback other than the war on drugs and all of that? Why do you think there until now, is it because there's been such an epidemic of harsher drugs that have been, okayed all over these years, causing more harm, and that people like myself and other people that are pushing back? Or do you think it's just what's going to make them money because there's like this move to, especially in marijuana and stuff like that?
Well, I used to work with a pain clinic here, and it just breaks my heart that, people are dying from this opioid epidemic, and there's a bigger increase in fentanyl, which are two prescribed medications. And there's that whole documentation or series on Netflix about how this epidemic started, was pushed to get these drugs on the market and money into people's pockets. But I mean, you don't see people overdosing on weed. You don't see people overdosing on ketamine. You don't see people overdosing on mushrooms. But yet those are still, if you get caught with it, you could get, a felony charge, and that could ruin your life. Where if you get a prescription, if you take more than one pill, you can be in serious trouble because, it shallows your breathing. And if someone's not around with Narcan at a party or even at your home, you could be in serious life-threatening trouble. So it's backwards in the society that, you have to go through the people that need those medications, the people that have stage 4 end of life cancer. They have to jump through a lot of hoops in Arizona, just because they think that those people are the ones pushing those meds when they need those to, get up and do stuff for their day. Fentanyl patches are serious, just touching it, you get a dose. And there's been plenty of videos of people touching fentanyl and overdosing and needing a Narcan treatment. And even they had a stigma here. I saw a nurse, she got Narcan because now you can get it over the counter at most states. So she got a Narcan to hold in her purse because she's a nurse. She knows how to administrate it. But then her insurance canceled her policy because they thought she was a drug user for getting Narcan, even though it's given by the state. So there's this, this big hoopla about these drugs is ridiculous at this point. They should just market it and turn it a profit like marijuana. Honestly, you're not going to stop the war on drugs ever.
So, okay, why are they stopping something that's going to save somebody's life? And it's not necessarily that, I guess you can get certified, right, to know how to administer Narcan if you need to,
You
right?
can go to Walgreens right now, I think in Arizona, and you can go to the pharmacist and say, I want a bottle of Narcan. And they'll teach you how to administer it at the pharmacy. But apparently they have to put it on your in your notes, or when you go to checkout, that's in your list of medications, and your insurance provider can see that. So apparently that goes back to
Wow.
your insurance company in some cases. That's the only one I've heard of. Hopefully they fixed that since then, because if they're canceling policies for people that wanted to protect other people, it's kind of messed up.
Right. But I guess that's not something like, I get insurance through my employer that people would think about.
Yeah.
So, in that instance, if that's still the case and something happens, would that would that create a problem with you continuing to be insured by your employer? I mean, a lot of people are, and so I'm one of them. So, like, that's an interesting way of, like, so people would be scared to get Narcan then, and so
Yeah.
that's why we're seeing more and more overdoses recently. There's people aren't realizing what's going on, but at the same time, there's this thing in the news about how this Halloween kids are going to be getting fentanyl in their candy, which doesn't make any sense. So, like,
I don't
how do
believe that. Was
yeah,
it someone was paying they were saying Molly or something, they were gonna put in kids candy. I'm like,
yeah,
no, adults are not gonna waste that.
yeah, they want to make money off of it. Why would they give it to kids?
Yeah, or just take it themselves.
Yeah, I don't. Anyway, so if that's the case, and then we're seeing all this like overdosing happen, I mean, we has not nothing new, but it seems to be like there's so much going on in the world that people aren't really paying attention to that. So why would I guess my question is why is Narcan considered something that is bad, even though it's helping those that are engaging in, or if somebody did take something? Like, I don't understand.
I think from the insurance perspective, they don't see the picture of why you're getting that. They only know what's that associated with, which is drug use. Um, I would just, if someone wants to get that, there are other resources. I'm sure either like the Southwest Center here or Arizona Public Maricopa County Health Clinic can get you more information on that, or even a bottle. But there's other resources and other ways to get it if your insurance is being iffy about it. I don't think nowadays it would be an issue of pushback, but you can always look that resource up on any health insurance policy page. They should
Okay.
have resources for that. Or again, you could always call like the Maricopa Health Center, or maybe the Southwest Center, um, or oh, what's the one downtown for HIV and AIDS? Um,
Can't think of it myself.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
but those
those places,
resources matter. Yeah.
they would have resources on things like that, especially
Okay.
in like the LGBTQ community. They would have additional resources for that, I'm sure.
Okay. So to kind of get back, like, in what you do in developing medications and stuff as your job, what I'm sure, I don't know if it's confidential, but like, what are you seeing in terms of kind of what you're developing being, good for people, or like, because we talked about the stigma for and against, and so I can see the pros and cons. Um, so what do you think would be? Can you kind of explain what you've felt being in the industry?
So I definitely learned a lot. So myself, I'm on very expensive medication, and when I lost my job, I would have to pay $5,000 a month
Oh wow.
for a 30-day supply for two medicines, and I need those to, survive. I would be in very serious trouble if I stopped taking these meds. But trying to get that medicine covered in Arizona when you don't have a job. Like, you don't get any money when you're laid off. And I only got $200 a week, and I was making a good amount of money. I'm like, how's that going to cover my $2,000 rent or my
Right.
car note or my, internet to look for jobs? But I was very concerned about, losing my health insurance. And I was very frustrated with the pharmaceutical companies for making that med so expensive. And I didn't qualify at first for Arizona Medicare or Medicaid, excuse me. So I was in big trouble. So when I started working in this clinical research field, it does take, these medical companies or pharmaceutical companies, they invest a lot, and I mean millions upon millions of dollars for research and testing on these drugs. So I have a better appreciation as to, the cost. But there needs to be more, I guess, what's it called, transparency with the public and these companies. Because, example, there's a hep C medicine that is the only drug that can cure hep C within taking it the first ounce of getting like a positive test result, but it's like $30,000 for these meds.
Yeah.
And your insurance company is going to be like, well, you're fine, right? You're not dead yet, so we're not going to pay for it. So
Wow.
it's honestly such a headache, because with my prior job that I'm doing now, I was doing drug reimbursement letters from, people needed chemo or they needed radiation, and the insurance company would be like, well, I don't think they need that treatment. And you'll be like, well, the doctor who's treating their deadly cancer thinks they need that treatment. So I think, it would be a back and forth between getting some pharmaceutical companies do have payment plans, or they do have payment options or payments assistance or a copay card, which people don't really know about, which I think needs to be more transparent. And then the insurance companies need to give a little bit more when it comes to covering the cost of these expensive medications.
Yikes. $30,000. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but it still does. It's like at this point, people need stuff. Anyway, so I guess what are you seeing in terms of like, as we talked about a little bit about, other options in the mental health is, my entire life, there's been this thing of like, when are we going to cure cancer? When are we going to cure HIV? And like, you're hearing kind of inklings of these, there's options, but yet I've had family members and friends die of cancer. And it just, I'm sick of hearing that word. So like,
Yeah.
do you think in our lifetimes we're actually that's gonna be available to help people? I mean, I know they're developing it in different nations, but it seems to me like, you hear the political ramifications of like, oh no, this just keeps people and money and everything that seems a little bit, doomsday about it. So do you think that there's gonna be a time when we're gonna be like, oh, yep, here's your cancer medication, and it's not like 5 rounds of chemo or something like that?
We do have pill forms of chemo available now, which is a great step towards going in 3 days a week to get transfusions of your chemo. There are more ways to detect cancer, which is a great way to beat cancer if we beat it to the punch. There's a new, especially here in Arizona, people should be getting a skin cancer check yearly. So if you don't have a dermatologist, go do that. But there's a sticker that they put on your mole. You wear it for a week, and then you mail it back to the lab. And without a biopsy or even cutting into you, they could tell if that mole is cancerous, which is incredible. And then they have Cologuard right now. If you don't know what that is, it should be covered by either Medicare or Medicaid or the government. But check with your insurance if you're over 50. If you don't want a colonoscopy, you could just do a stool sample at home, and that tells you if you have colon cancer. So we're heading in the right direction, especially with there's a lot of research going on right now. Have you heard of CRISPR? Do you know what that is?
A little bit, but can you explain?
So I just joined a WebEx conference with CRISPR this uh, Tuesday. They talked about their developments in CRISPR, which basically is cutting out the bad part of DNA and putting it in a good part of DNA. So a lot of cancers are gene mutations, and that's the base of most cancers. So if we can cut out that bad part of the DNA or an RNA and put in a new one, that's a big step towards gene mutation and treatments for gene therapy and cancer.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's all positive news, but again, not really in the news these days with everything that's going on. So
Yeah,
I guess there's a hopeful outlook, but it just, I don't know. Ever since I was a kid, it was like, are we going to cure cancer? Is my generation going to cure cancer? And it's like, are we there yet? So
yeah.
that's good news. I just wish that it was a little bit more explained. So why? I guess my next question is, with the healthcare system being the way it is in the U.S., why is it so drastically different than pretty much every other country? Why is like you hear about Canada being like, oh, we got free healthcare, or you go, is it Denmark or Norway, and they're like, our lives are amazing here because we don't have to worry about like paying crazy bills if we do end up in the hospital or give birth or whatever it may be. So what, you know, obviously I don't have all the answers and nobody will, but kind of why is it so different, and why is the development of like what you do, medications, everything so important?
So I'll start with Europe. So I have grandparents in Europe, and they're in their 80s, and they're always in the hospital to see some sort of doctor. Um, and they still have their issues when it comes to their Medicare. I mean, their medical system. But in Europe, Italy, Germany, Spain, they have an older population, but they're not as sick as the American population. So I think that's one step to look at is, again, public education and starting from not not treating the patient but preventing the sickness, if that makes sense. So hypertension, diabetes, you've heard about this in school about eating fruits and vegetables. We need to make sure that our country is healthy as a whole, and it's really hard for a lot of people to be healthy, because if you're you know already have an illness, you may need help doing things around the house. If you're raising three kids, or if you're a single mom, it's hard to go to the gym because you don't have time to yourself. So there's a lot of players playing into the healthcare system. When it comes to Canada with their universal healthcare, of course, everything's more expensive and they have taxes to cover that. So that's another reason that they have the system set up that way from the beginning. That, same thing with, I think, France. You have education and healthcare, but additional taxes come with that. You need a way to pay for it. And I think if we had universal healthcare, which would be great here, I mean, we're already being taxed for everything, especially in Arizona. Like my registration here for my car is almost $500, and I pay taxes on top of that. So, do I really want to pay for taxes for other people's health insurance? I would love to, but I can only take so much out of my paycheck.
Right.
And I'm an independent voter, and I know spending has to come from somewhere. So when it comes to where is the resources coming from, I'm always a little hesitant, but I do want everyone to be taken care of, especially with me volunteering in a hospice. Sometimes you have to, even if you're dying, you have to be there to take care of yourself, which is sad to say. And I had a hospice patient. He was babysitting his 2 or 3 grandchildren dying so his son could go to school, and he had to go pay for his VA healthcare visits because he's
Yikes.
a Vietnam vet. So, it's a lot of players that are coming into play for our healthcare system.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, I haven't even. I think we could do a whole nother episode on the whole veterans and the VA situation. But yeah, that's intense. So I guess it's hard. And obviously, we're not going to get all the answers, but it's just interesting to kind of hear somebody like yourself who works in it, because there's everybody has their opinions on the healthcare system, and
Yeah.
hears this and sees that, and like we all have our opinions, so it's just kind of good to hear that there is some sort of, there's people out there that do care, but it's like the system, there's all kinds of hoops you have to jump through. So I guess we can end on the note of what do you where you go from here, like you're developing drugs, but what, in terms of your career, or what do you think is going to happen, and what do you hope for the future?
So I'm looking at going back to school at ASU for basically gene science or bioengineering for genes and oncology and looking at things at a cellular level. So I wanted to be like a genetic counselor. That was something I'm interested in because there's a lot of there's like a disease called XXY where men have additional Y or X chromosome. That's genetic that you have to deal with, and there's BRCA1 and 2, which is breast cancer mutation, so that runs in the family for breast cancer. So there's a lot of things that go into your genes, and I just find that as a fascinating field. And I think moving forward in the medical field, especially with cancer testing and research, that's definitely where we're heading when it comes to researching technology. So that's something I want to be a part of for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining this episode. It was fascinating. We went almost an hour. That went by really fast. So thanks to everybody. I know there were some people that popped in the chat, said hello. Thank you. And to those that will hear this or watch this, thank you to everybody. Be safe out there. And thanks, Kevin, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Awesome.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your evening.